I knew something was wrong when the intern called me Emily for the third time that week and no one corrected him. My name's Emma. 6 years in that office, and I was still getting confused with the girl who stocks the fridge. But that's how it works when you don't make noise, when you quietly fix broken workflows, while the shiny people wave their hands around and get LinkedIn praise for leading the charge. Like the time our compliance certs were about to lapse because some genius deleted the audit logs to free up server space. While Marcus Langford, new hire, teeth too white to be natural, was presenting animated slides about streamlining culture, I was in the server room with a thumb drive, digging us out of a $2.4M fine. No applause. Just back pain and a passive-aggressive post-it on my monitor that said we should all learn to delegate more, in pink gel pen. That's the thing about being good at your job in a world built for peacocks. They'll watch you pull the wagon until your back gives out, then ask if maybe you were just too rigid for innovation. And look, if you're nodding along right now like, yup, been there, do me a solid, tap that subscribe button and toss a like. Not for me. For the whole crew behind this mic, who turn these stories into something bingeable instead of rage-inducing. You'd be amazed how far one thumbs up can go when you're piecing together betrayal between sips of bad coffee. All right, back to it. Marcus arrived with a title so long it needed 2 lines on his business card: Director of Operational Transformation and Strategic Synergy. Translation: someone's MBA friend got parachuted into middle management to gut the teams and spin it as progress. He held court like a TED speaker with a minor god complex, dropping buzzwords like grenades, agile recalibration, compliance fluidity, culture elasticity. I used to keep a bingo card in my drawer, full blackout by Wednesday. And yet he got traction. He was loud, handsome in that waxy, artificial way, and smiled like every question was beneath him. People like that don't climb the ladder. They get thrown to the top by whoever built the ladder. First thing he did was hold a listening town hall where he didn't listen. Then he suggested that we reevaluate legacy roles, which, surprise, surprise, meant chopping heads in departments that didn't hold beers with him after work. Mine was top of the list. Quiet, senior, resistant to agile onboarding. But I wasn't just filing SOPs and checking boxes. I built our compliance ecosystem from scratch, tied it into vendor contracts, configured automated audits, and yeah, tucked my name, deliberately and legally, into the footnotes of the very systems he was trying to bulldoze. I had seen the writing on the wall 2 quarters ago and started laying landmines. One of them was something I called the 7C clause. The rest of the office treated those vendor contracts like they were just templates. But I knew the buyers would comb through every line with a lawyer and a magnifying glass. So I slipped in a clause about mandatory continuity for system certifications. If the designated key person left, certification stalled until they re-verified. Guess whose name was on the key person line? I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I knew one day some Marcus would show up with his teeth and his buzzwords and his PowerPoints, thinking compliance was just optional paperwork. And when that happened, I wanted my exit to speak louder than my presence ever could. Of course, I didn't expect it to come so fast. Not yet, but Marcus moved quickly. Within 3 weeks, he'd reshuffled half our workflow to a tool we didn't even own licenses for yet. He sidelined me in meetings, claimed I struggled to adapt. He said I was institutional knowledge with no velocity. I'm not sure what that means either. I think he was trying to sound like Tony Robbins if Tony Robbins did cocaine in the parking lot. I still kept showing up, still fixing what broke, still pulling the wagon. But my gut knew. You can smell your own firing coming. It's in the way people stop asking questions they know only you can answer. It's in the way IT accidentally disables your VPN credentials for 2 hours and no one apologizes. It's in the way your desk starts feeling colder, like even the HVAC knows you're on the chopping block. The morning it happened, I had just re-verified the last set of vendor prequel forms. All 48 of them. Manual reviews, cross-checked, time-stamped, linked to the audit ledger. It was the kind of thing no one noticed unless it failed. That's how I spent 6 years being invisible unless something broke. Marcus called me into conference room C. He had a tablet in front of him and a fake smile smeared across his face. HR was on Zoom, muted with their video off. That's how you know it's a firing and not a meeting. He said, "We're restructuring. Your role has become redundant in the new framework." I said, "You want that in an email?" He laughed. A short, nasal bark like someone kicked a goose. And he fired me, just like that. No severance. No handoff plan. No backup for the systems I built. Just a smirk and a "don't worry, we've got it covered." It started with a compliance review meeting that should have taken 20 minutes and ended with me trying not to throw a chair across the conference room. Marcus had commandeered the room like it was a stage, and he was auditioning for Shark Tank, Midwestern Douche Edition. He had 3 screens set up, one for the slide deck, one for live metrics, and one, I kid you not, just displaying his name in bold Helvetica. Marcus Langford, director, like the credits in a bad Netflix pilot. We were reviewing the Q3 compliance pre-cert logs, which, mind you, I had closed out 2 weeks ahead of schedule. But he wasn't interested in the work. He was interested in the narrative, which meant spinning my airtight system into a liability so he could restructure me out of existence and look like a visionary doing it. He pointed at the chart. See this redundancy loop? Why do we have 3 verification steps for a single vendor approval? I said because one is internal, one is third party, and one satisfies federal compliance cross-checks. You cut one, and we risk nonconformance. He grinned like I'd just played right into his little TED talk trap. That's exactly my point. We've built a bureaucracy that feeds itself. Emma, you've done great work here, but we don't need a cathedral to bless every box of bolts that enters the warehouse. I leaned back. You want to explain that to the Department of Energy when they audit our thermal units? Someone from marketing chuckled. Marcus didn't. I think you're a little too invested in the old system. He said, it's admirable but not scalable. We're moving toward agile compliance. Agile compliance, I repeated, deadpan. That sounds like calling a parachute optional halfway through a skydive. He waved me off. Look, this isn't personal, but your documentation style is dense, legacy. We need lean-forward operators. I stared at him. Do you want me to confirm you just said that? In writing? He scoffed. You want that in an email. And that's when I knew it was already done. My laptop was still warm in my backpack when he slid a thin folder across the table. Standard HR template. Termination effective immediately. The Zoom HR lady unmuted just long enough to say we'll be mailing your final check and disappeared like a magician's rabbit. I didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't point to the 7 vendor chains that required my login to validate orders, didn't mention the pre-cert flags I manually audited because our automated system was still held together with duct tape and blind hope. I just looked at the signature line on the document. His, not mine, that would matter later. Oh, it would matter a hell of a lot. He stood up and gave a short, rehearsed little nod like this was supposed to be a moment of mutual understanding. Thanks for everything, Emma. We'll take it from here. I looked around the room one last time. At the glass walls, the smudged whiteboard with my notes still half erased. The blinking server status light in the corner no one ever noticed but me, and I felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, just a kind of vacuum. Like someone had opened an airlock inside my ribcage. Then I walked out. No dramatic speech. No tears. Just the sound of my boots on linoleum and the low, electric hum of the systems I'd built still running, silent, loyal, and waiting for someone to notice they no longer had a keeper. In my inbox, as I packed up my desk, an automated notification had already arrived. Reminder key person verification required for vendor contract package #VCT 198. I smiled, not because it was funny, because it had begun. I disappeared so cleanly they didn't even notice I was gone. No farewell lunch. No HR exit interview. Not even a recycled email about Emma's new adventure. Just a half-packed banker box, one burned-out office plant, and a manager who thought deleting my Outlook account was the same thing as replacing me. Marcus strutted through the office like he'd slayed a dragon, told the team he was desiloing the compliance bottleneck, announced that all workflows would be self-sustaining now, like spreadsheets could suddenly become sentient and audit themselves. By day 3, it started. Quiet, subtle. The first vendor approval failed to clear. The prequel system hung during an automated dock sync. The warehouse flagged a delivery that shouldn't have been accepted but was because the vendor's expired ISO cert didn't trigger the rejection protocol I used to manage manually. But Marcus? He blamed admin sloppiness, said someone must have fat-fingered a drop-down menu, called it growing pains. Then 3 more approvals failed. Procurement head flagged it to him during the weekly sync. Marcus brushed it off. I'm aware. We're phasing out over-engineered protocols. Emma's stuff was too rigid. That was his refrain now. Emma's stuff. As if my work had been a quirky collection of decorative doilies he found in the attic and decided to toss. But here's the thing about invisible systems. They only stay invisible when they work. The moment they don't, people start noticing what they never appreciated. On my end, I was out, completely, phone off, Slack deleted. No more late-night patch jobs. No more babysitting audits like they were toddlers with scissors. I was drinking burnt diner coffee in a booth across town, watching the rain streak sideways across the window and wondering if anyone back at Viron had even tried to log into the compliance dashboard. That's when it pinged. Not a message, not a call, an alert, encrypted, legal originated. From the document automation system I'd helped pilot 2 years ago. It was supposed to track risk flags and trigger early escalations for any key person dependencies. Contract package #MZX 311 flagged for validation interrupt section 7C clause in effect. Verification required from designated individual, Caldwell, Emma S. I read it twice. My coffee went cold in my hand. I opened the attached document. It was the deal I'd heard whispers about for months. The one Marcus had been parading around as his magnum opus. A $200 million strategic acquisition from a European buyer with stricter compliance requirements than the Vatican. And they'd triggered it, my clause, the one I had quietly, surgically embedded into the vendor qualification pipeline. Not because I wanted credit, but because I knew. I knew one day someone would try to overwrite the entire system for the sake of optics and ego. And when they did, I wanted a kill switch. I just didn't expect it to come so soon. The clause was simple, elegant. If the designated compliance architect was no longer in service at the time of certification, all sign-offs had to be reviewed and reaffirmed by the same individual. No substitutes, no overrides, and per contract. The buyer had to verify continuity before releasing final funds. In other words, no Emma, no deal. I sat back and let the cold clarity settle in like lake water after a storm. No adrenaline, no shaking hands, just stillness. They'd built a machine on top of my name, and now the machine had stopped, and the only way to start it again was me. By the end of week 1, the seams were starting to split. Not full rupture yet, but the kind of hairline cracks you can only see if you know where to look. Like a wine glass that looks fine until you pour something into it and watch the drip form from a place you swear wasn't there before. Inside Viron's walls, the pressure was ramping up. The acquisition deal was barreling toward its signing date like a semi with no brakes, and the compliance team, what was left of it, was losing its collective mind. I heard through a former teammate, Julia, that 3 internal checklists had been suspended for review, and an external audit from the buyer's legal team had turned up a dozen inconsistencies. That's corporate speak for you're about to get your ass handed to you by a man in a tie who makes more money in a week than you do in a quarter. But Marcus? He was busy hosting fireside Zooms with the board, telling them everything was ahead of schedule and leaner than ever. The man was carving holes in the hull and calling it modern ventilation. Then came Section C. It started small. An email thread from an analyst at the buyer's firm, a woman named Lai Chen, who apparently read every single word of the contract, instead of just hitting Control plus F for bonus and equity. She flagged a phrase buried in the compliance continuity agreement. Per Section C, final certification of system integrity must be validated and signed by the individual designated in the originating configuration index, Caldwell Emma S. She included a PDF snippet. It had my signature. Dated, countersigned by the former COO. Legally binding, fully ratified, and crystal clear. It should have caused a hard stop, a total freeze, but Marcus, he treated it like a typo. He responded himself not legal, because the man thinks he's King Midas with a Gmail account, and said, Emma Caldwell is no longer with the company. As current director of operations, I'll be signing in her place. No explanation, no authority, just ego and ignorance on display for an international buyer to marvel at. Backdoor whispers started immediately. Glenn Trask, the buyer's lead attorney, wasn't pleased. Not because he knew who I was, but because Section C wasn't just some formality. It was a legal tripwire, and Marcus had just waltzed across it with a flag in his hand and fireworks strapped to his back. Over in my world, I was watching from the shadows. Not actively, mind you, I wasn't glued to a screen waiting for disaster, but I had contacts, friends, people who weren't loyal to Marcus's PowerPoint empire. I got pings. A forwarded Slack message. Anyone know what Emma used to call the certification hash validator? Ours is stuck. An email screenshot from Julia. Marcus just told Glenn he's the new Emma. Glenn didn't laugh. A text from Ravi, the last honest engineer in that place. Yo, did you know your name is hard-coded into the system certs? What the actual hell? I didn't respond. To any of them, not out of spite, out of intent. Silence, when used correctly, is not absence. It's pressure. And I knew Marcus was starting to sweat. He thought he could bulldoze everything I built and walk away with a hero's send-off and a stock option handshake. But my fingerprints weren't just on the blueprints. They were the keystone. And now the weight of a $200 million deal was pressing on a clause with my name on it, and him holding a pen he wasn't allowed to use. Every time they tried to patch it, override it, assign a proxy signer, the system kicked it back. Because I hadn't just written the clause. I'd written the damn code. Emma Caldwell, designated signatory. No override without biometric reauthentication. And no one, not Marcus, not Glenn, not the entire legal arm of Viron Systems, could fake my thumbprint. So I sat and watched, and waited, and let the silence get loud. The conference room at Viron HQ was dressed up like it was getting married, fresh flowers, polished glass, branded water bottles no one would drink. Every exec had their deal face on. Controlled smiles, overpriced watches tapping nervously against ceramic mugs, small talk about market trajectories, and Q4 projections that sounded like white noise over a funeral dirge. Marcus sat at the head of the table like he owned gravity. He was wearing a navy blazer so tight it looked shrink-wrapped, sleeves rolled to his elbows like he was ready to disrupt something. His smile flickered every time someone looked at the papers too long. Across from him sat the buyers, 6 of them with the lead attorney, Glenn Trask, in the center. Glenn didn't do small talk. Glenn didn't do smiles. Glenn read everything 3 times and had the energy of a man who could shut down a merger with a single cough. The first 45 minutes went as expected. Recaps, a few ceremonial thanks, compliments lobbed back and forth like volleyballs made of cardboard. Then Glenn tapped his pen. Subtle, deliberate, like a chess player lifting a rook. I have a quick point of clarification before we proceed with the signatures, he said, flipping to a tabbed section in the contract binder. Section C, System Certification and Continuity Clause. The room tensed. It was the kind of tensing that feels like someone turning the thermostat down without moving. Marcus glanced toward legal, expecting them to speak. They didn't. Glenn continued, slow and clear. This clause states, all compliance architecture and system integrity documentation shall be validated and signed by the designated key person named in the originating configuration index, prior to final transfer of liability. He paused, flipping the page with surgeon-like precision. The individual listed here, he held up a printed appendix pointing to a highlighted line, is Emma S. Caldwell. He looked around. Is Miss Caldwell present today? Silence, and then the smallest tremor ran through Marcus's hand, just enough to make the top page of the signature stack flutter. I'll be signing those forms, Marcus said, straightening. Emma was part of a prior structure. I've assumed full operational responsibility. The clause is ceremonial. Glenn didn't blink. We don't consider $200 million transactions ceremonial, Mr. Langford. Someone coughed. Someone else stopped mid-sip of water and set their glass down with a soft clink. Glenn laid the paper flat on the table like a playing card. Emma Caldwell's signature is not optional. It is a trigger clause. Noncompliance suspends certification transfer and liability assumptions per subsection 7C. Your company agreed to it. Your former COO countersigned it. It is enforceable today. Marcus tried to laugh. It came out dry, hollow. Our systems were updated. I'm the acting director. I've overseen the latest integration. Glenn raised a brow. And were you involved in the original architecture? Well, no, but, and do you possess system-level credentialing to confirm certification continuity per chain of custody? Marcus shifted. That's technical jargon. The system's been updated. We've streamlined. The buyer's due diligence team attempted to authenticate system credentials via the standard signatory pipeline. The system rejected all attempts not validated by Miss Caldwell's biometric passcode. Marcus froze. Now the room was ice. The board members behind him, who had smiled earlier, congratulated him, nodded through his bluster, began to glance at each other. Uncertain, irritated. Someone muttered, Jesus. Glenn closed the binder. This deal doesn't close without her signature. Since I assume no one here can forge a legally binding biometric hash and survive the litigation, I suggest we find her. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Legal. Legal looked at their shoes. Across the city in a quiet corner booth at an empty diner, I scrolled through the push notifications on my phone. They were stacking up like dominoes, 1 from Julia, 2 from Ravi, 3 from a number I didn't recognize, probably Marcus, burning through burner phones like a teenager after curfew. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened the system dashboard remotely just to see. Section C, triggered, status, blocked, key person, Caldwell Emma S. pending signature, and under that one beautiful line in red, no proxy signature permitted. I stirred my coffee, watched the cream swirl, and let them sit in the mess they'd made. Marcus cracked in slow motion. At first, it was denial, big, glossy denial wrapped in buzzwords and desperation cologne. He started talking louder, which is corporate for I'm not wrong, you just don't get it. He paced around the boardroom like it was a tech stage in hell, repeating phrases like we're solutioning this internally, and there's a compliance elasticity here that's being overlooked. Glenn Trask didn't even flinch. The man could have been carved from legal-grade granite. She was a junior manager, Marcus finally snapped. Slapping a palm on the table like that would magically rewrite the past. Easily replaced. She had no executive decision-making authority. Glenn didn't look up from his binder. He just pulled out a document with the same calm you might use to unwrap a sandwich. This is a notarized copy of the original system configuration file, he said, voice flat as steel, dated 3 months ago. Signed by Emma S. Caldwell. Designated as key person under Clause 7C. Countersigned by your former COO, Daniel R. Myers. He slid it across the table like a quiet grenade. Not a junior manager. Not optional. Legally embedded. You agreed to this. Marcus didn't touch the paper. He just sat there, blinking like the air had turned to soup. That was the moment the shift happened. Not in his eyes, those were still darting around like he was looking for an escape hatch, but in the room. The board, the VPs, even legal. They started to move their chairs ever so slightly away from him, like they didn't want the residue of his meltdown to stick to their suits. Someone cleared their throat and muttered, we need to pause and regroup. Someone else said, did we know about this clause? Another voice, why didn't he flag this before? The word pause became delay. The word regroup became emergency. And just like that, the $200 million dream deal stopped mid-sentence. Not because of market conditions or external politics or global unrest. Because of a woman no one bothered to remember until it was too late. I was at home when the news hit, bare feet on cold tile, still in an oversized hoodie with a stain from last week's curry. The press conference streamed through my laptop, tiny faces, packed into a podium frame too small for the egos behind it. A reporter asked about the delay. The spokesperson smiled too wide and said there were minor procedural clarifications pending with the buyer's legal team. But I could see the flush in his cheeks, the twitch in his left eyelid. The kind of tells you only catch when you've spent your life being ignored in the background while watching everyone else take credit for your work. Julia texted, "They're in full damage control. Marcus is blaming you for hiding clauses lol. He literally signed the vendor renewal you wrote that clause into. I didn't respond." Instead, I opened the system one more time. The dashboard still showed blocked in red. No overrides, no substitutions, no deal. And for the first time since I walked out of that glass-walled office, I let the corners of my mouth twitch upward. Not a grin, not a smirk. Just the quiet kind of smile that lives somewhere deep in your ribs. The kind that says you thought I was invisible, but it turns out I was the ground beneath your feet the whole time. Then I closed the laptop. Let them scramble, let them panic. Let them tear through every line of code trying to find a loophole. They could shout, they could spin, they could rage into microphones and wave hands at whiteboards. But there was no storming the gate, because I was the gate, and I'd already locked it behind me. By Monday morning, the word pause had grown fangs. Investors wanted answers. The buyer's legal team went from stern to surgical. And internally, Viron's leadership team realized they weren't just facing a delay, they were staring down the barrel of a full-blown deal collapse. Because without certification, there was no liability transfer. Without liability transfer, there was no check. And without a check, Viron's whole post-deal expansion plan? Vapor. The first attempt to fix it came through the back door. Legal drafted a statement proposing equivalent authority reassignment. They tried to loop the clause into a broader chain of custody reinterpretation. Glenn Trask responded in under 6 words, "That dog won't hunt. Try again." Then they tried to use internal legal counsel to retroactively authorize a system certification. The system kicked it back. Twice. Because I designed the backend trigger to recognize signature lineage. If you didn't match the original biometric or role authorization lineage, the chain shattered. The irony? They couldn't even see the code that blocked them, because I'd partitioned that section under a legacy framework only accessible by accounts with my clearance level, which, of course, had been deleted by Marcus. So now the same man who fired me was stuck behind a digital drawbridge with a $200 million sword swinging over his head, and the key was in my hand. Julia, God bless her, tried first. She texted, "Hey, I know this is messy. I know he's a piece of yeah, but they need you to sign." The whole thing's frozen. Then came Ravi. "Can we talk? Not even about the certs. Just I think they're finally seeing it." I didn't reply. Then came the call. Not from Marcus. That would have required something resembling humility. No, he made Julia do it. I let it ring. Once, twice. Then hit decline. 10 minutes later, I checked my inbox out of curiosity. One new message. Subject, urgent request for certification. Contact body. Emma, we understand there have been misunderstandings. Viron Systems would like to formally request your cooperation in finalizing the pending certification process. Please advise how we can proceed. Best operations support. I clicked reply, typed just one sentence. I no longer provide services to Viron Systems. Please refer to Section 7C. Attach the PDF of the clause. Sent, closed tab, no emoji, no pettiness, no victory lap, just boundaries and enforcement. Later that day, Marcus tried calling from a blocked number. Twice. Then someone from HR. Then the former COO, Daniel Myers himself, who'd retired to Scottsdale and was probably halfway through a margarita when someone told him, "You signed the clause that's killing the deal." But none of them had what I needed to hear. What I wanted was never revenge. Not really. What I wanted was control, to not be disposable, to not be overwritten by someone who thought shouting louder made them smarter. And now I had it. Not by screaming, not by breaking anything, just by being the one person who couldn't be replaced. They could claw at the walls, light fires, swear I was the villain. But Section 7C didn't care about feelings, and neither did I. By Thursday, Viron had gone from agile and adaptive to a slow-motion car crash with the hazard lights blinking and the driver blaming the airbag. The board called an emergency offsite. Not that it mattered. I had built the kind of digital deadbolt you don't open with apologies and bagels. The clause didn't care how many VP titles you stacked in a room. It needed my signature or nothing moved. So they did what desperate people do when all the exits are sealed. They folded. The email came from their general counsel. Crisp, polite, legally paranoid. Emma, Viron Systems would like to extend a formal offer for short-term contractor engagement. Compensation and scope negotiable. Please advise on conditions under which you would consider reinstatement of certification responsibilities. I didn't answer right away. I took a walk, bought a cinnamon roll the size of a manhole cover, sat on a bench and watched pigeons bully a seagull out of a sandwich crust. Then I went home, opened a blank document, and typed 3 bullets. Marcus Langford is to be immediately and permanently removed from any role involving system oversight or staff management. My back pay, unpaid PTO, severance, and missed bonus is to be paid out in full and tripled. I will not itemize, I will not explain. From this point forward, my compliance architecture is no longer property of Viron Systems. It is licensed through Caldwell Strategy Group, LLC. I will certify systems under that entity only. Any use beyond that will trigger breach proceedings. I read it twice. Didn't change a word. Attached it to an email with the subject line conditions for cooperation. Sent it, then I waited. 12 hours later, the buyer's legal team called my bluff or tried to. Glenn Trask, who hadn't flinched all week, actually picked up the phone and asked to discuss flexibility. I said the clause isn't flexible. He asked if the board could review alternative structures. I said they already signed off on one. He asked quietly if I understood the weight of what I was doing. I said, "You're the one who insisted on designated accountability." "Congratulations, you found it." He paused for a long moment, then said, "Understood." By the next day, the deal had been rewritten, not the terms of sale that stayed intact, but the certification pathway that was now a direct license agreement with my LLC, Caldwell Strategy Group, 5 days old, bank account still warm, trademark filed that morning. Now the only approved compliance gatekeeper for a $200 million merger. The founder of Viron was livid. He sent a reply with no greeting, no sign-off, just, "This is extortion." I replied with a screenshot of his own signature on Section 7C, and nothing else. When the board realized the buyer was fine with my terms, and only my terms, they broke like damp drywall. They didn't even push back. Just signed the new agreement and asked if I could please proceed expeditiously. But there was still the matter of Marcus. He showed up to the office that Friday wearing sunglasses indoors and the jittery swagger of a man hoping no one's seen the news. HR met him at the elevator. No warning, no goodbyes, just a badge deactivation and two plainclothes security staff walking him out through the side door. I got the photo from Julia later, snapped from her desk. Marcus carrying a half-zipped duffel bag, his mouth caught mid-protest, as if he was still trying to explain how Emma was just a formality. Funny how quiet it gets when the formality turns out to be the foundation. The next morning, I got the official contract packet via secure DocuSign. My terms, my entity, my system. And one last line, added at the very bottom by Glenn Trask himself. Clause 7C obligations fulfilled. They didn't expect me to walk in. Not really. Oh, they were prepared, badges cleared, security briefed. Someone had even dusted the seat at the end of the boardroom table like I was royalty returning from exile, but none of them truly believed I'd show. Not after everything, but I did. Black blazer jeans, no fanfare, hair tied back, no makeup. Just me, carrying a single leather folder and the silence of someone who'd already won. The room was humming with artificial calm. Board members made small talk that died as soon as I stepped in. Glenn Trask was already seated, his legal pad open, fountain pen resting across a crisp single-page contract. His face didn't move, but he gave the faintest nod, respect, not relief. He knew I wasn't here to save them. I was here to sign a paper and be done. Marcus was there too, not at the head of the table anymore. He was tucked off to the side, coat folded over his lap like a child waiting to be called into the principal's office. His jaw clenched when he saw me, like he had 1,000 words building behind his teeth and no air left to say any of them. I didn't look at him, not yet. Glenn gestured to the page. One line, my signature, the final gate. The system had already validated my digital input through Caldwell Strategy Group, but the buyer wanted ink, something physical, irreversible, symbolic. The world had moved on from paper, but contracts still bled on it. I signed, full name, steady hand, slight curve on the D. Glenn took the page, slid it into the folder, and closed it. "Thank you, Miss Caldwell." He didn't smile, didn't need to. The job was done. I turned to leave. But then I stopped, turned just enough to face the broken man in the corner. Marcus sat like an unplugged robot, back too straight, eyes too wide, watching his career dissolve molecule by molecule. His hands were clenched around the handles of his bag, knuckles pale. He opened his mouth to say something. I beat him to it, leaned in slightly, just enough for him to hear no one else. Next time I said soft and flat, "Yes, you put it in an email." He blinked, swallowed, but nothing came out. There was no round of applause, no dramatic standoff, no victory song, just the sound of my heels as I walked out the door. And I didn't look back. Not for Marcus, not for the board, not for the ghosts of 6 years spent cleaning up behind men who thought systems were optional and silence meant obedience. I didn't go back to Viron, never intended to. I didn't need a desk or a nameplate anymore. My LLC now licensed the very architecture they once claimed was too rigid, and every quarter, it'd pay through the nose to keep the engine running. At 6 times my old salary, with a non-compete clause that meant they couldn't touch a single line of code without my say-so. And when the press release went out, full of jargon and fake smiles and congratulatory nonsense, I only scanned it for one thing: a name. Most of them were crossed out, redacted, retracted, or labeled as transitioned. Except one: Emma S. Caldwell, Compliance Architect, Certified Partner, the last woman standing. The only name they couldn't erase. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.